It's tough out here. Tougher than I thought it would be sometimes. It can even get lonely, sometimes quiet. Too quiet, like something's about to happen kind of quiet. It's true what they say about war. Is it worth it? Being a Christian? Walking this walk? Talking this talk? Fighting this fight? You bet it's worth it. It's completely worth it. But look, I've got some advice for you. If you're gonna try and take ground from the devil, you better know he's gonna put up a fight. Friend, write this down. You better be well armed.
Well, good morning again, everybody. My name is Joel. I'm the lead pastor here. Today is Team Spirit Day. I don't normally wear bright, obnoxious yellow. Today's a special day. They get to adjust the exposure on the camera. So if you're joining us today, wherever you are, whether it's in the hospital, whether it's driving along the road, whether you're watching this later in the week, sorry that I'm glowing right now. They'll eventually fix that and I won't glow as much, but glad you're with us as well. For those of you who are guests in the house today, thanks so much for being here. We are honored by your presence. We hope you'll take us up on the offer to meet us at the guest center. Say hello. We want to bribe you with the free gift, but it's just an excuse because we want to know your name. Not because we want to spam you. We just want to let you realize you matter. We know that we're kind of a larger church. We know that, so we want to make sure that you're not just a face in the crowd. You matter. So we're so glad you're here today. If you've ever been online doing anything, whether it's Walmart or any of your favorite places to shop, or it's social media, you have undoubtedly found this beautiful little thing called your own online profile. And they're trying to figure out in that whole process, who are you? They're trying to figure out who you really are. And the idea, of course, is that you put these things out there, and then the world's supposed to be able to find you. It's supposed to allegedly connect us. We can debate that later if it actually does or doesn't, but that's the idea. And probably one of my favorites in terms of really making you consider who you really are has to be Twitter. Twitter was amazing when it first came out, which now has been a long time back, but because it demanded you do everything with brevity. It demanded everything be short. 160 characters was what your online profile could be. So in 160 characters, not words, characters, you were supposed to say something about yourself. You were supposed to say something so others could find you by name or by handle and figure out a little bit about you. When I first was signing up for Twitter, because I was told pastors needed to be engaged on social media, so I said, okay, I got on Twitter. And I don't remember when it was now. I'm talking not too long after it came out. But and I had to look at this. So I looked at this, how to capture myself in 160 characters. And I'm looking at this thing, and I probably spent 2 days, which for me is a long time to think about anything. But 2 days, and I'm going, man, how do I can barely get my demographics in 160 characters. White, Southerner turned Californian. At the time, I was in my 30s. How do I possibly write that out in 160 characters? So I spent like 2 days thinking about it. And this is what I came up with. And I use this on Twitter, and I use it on my blog. I use it in books. I use it everywhere because it's a reasonable capture of me. Here's mine. Here's my description. It goes like this: grateful child of God, husband, dad, pastor, author. That's 52 characters. 52. I did it in about half. And yes, periods and spaces count. So if this were on one line, you would see a space after God, a single space after husband, single space after dad. You get the idea. 52 characters. And actually, not a bad description of me. Now, that could fit a lot of my nerdy friends who also could be author and pastor. I hang out with a bunch of pastors, so that description fits a lot of us, but at least I said, okay, that's Joel Dorman in 52 characters, more or less. That's me. Kinda. I've been thinking about changing it. Maybe you have a good idea what I could add to it, but lest you think that's easy, okay? And maybe you've never tried to do that, and maybe you need to try. But in your discussion guide this week, there's actually a bunch of boxes And I'd love to see you try. There's 160 boxes there. And the idea is you need to describe yourself, your little profile, your biography, as it were, in 160 characters or less. And if you manage to get one that's really good, I'd love for you to email me and just tell me, because it's fun for me just to go through and see these different descriptions of people and what they write about themselves. I mean, it's like what when Chris was sharing earlier. We don't talk about ourselves very much. It's very uncomfortable. So when someone successfully writes a good profile about themselves, it's interesting. And what people can put in there, I mean, that's me, and maybe there's something in that list you didn't know about me. But maybe you knew it all, in which case it's not very creative. But I'd love to see yours. I'm sure you're much more creative than I am. I just got fed up, and I just said I needed one thing among everything. So that's what I did. That's what I did for mine. But the whole question is, who are you? Who are you, and what do you do, and what do you value, and what gets you up in the morning? That's what these are supposed to be. And for those of us claiming to be Christian, we have this, depending on how you look at it, overarching or maybe underlying motivation for what we do. We have this drive that's defining us and shaping us and determining how we speak and how we live and how we vote and how we talk, maybe even how we shop, and certainly how we spend. It governs everything else we do. So if that is what it means to be Christian, then who are you takes on a very different ramification. That the consequences of saying, who are you? And you start saying, well, I'm a Christian. Wow, that's a mouthful. Now what are we really saying? What does it mean to be grateful child of God? What does it mean to be disciple of Jesus? What does it mean to be Christian? What does the Bible say about all this? Well, welcome back to our series, Well Armed, where we're going through Ephesians chapter 6, verses 10 through 17. And we're looking at each piece of this armor that God has given us to fight a spiritual war with. Now, we're in message number 3 today, but message number 1 we talked about that some of us don't even know we're at war. We don't even know that there's a battle going on. And one of the greatest tactics of our enemy is the fact that he makes us think there's not even a battle, that there's not even a war. And then he just kind of isolates us because, he doesn't have to worry about us anymore. We don't even know we're fighting. So we talked about that in message 1. Last week we talked about the belt of truth. Today we're in message number 3. It's called Raised to Life. And we're looking at another piece of this armor. We're looking at the second part of verse 14 of chapter 6. But it's important to me that you see this in context. It's real easy to sometimes lose the forest for the trees. And when we're looking at the trees, I don't want you to miss the context of everything that is being told to us in this passage. The Apostle Paul wrote it first century. He's in prison, and he's in prison because he's preaching the gospel. He's a persecuted Christian. He wasn't supposed to be teaching about Jesus, but he does. It gets him put back in prison. He's writing this letter. He sees these Roman soldiers coming and going. This imagery is fresh on his mind. It's fresh on the mind of his readers. They're seeing this all the time. And this is what we read when we're reading Ephesians chapter 6, verses 10 through 17. And I've asked my wife, Patty, to come and read this passage to us because since we're reading the same passage every week, I want you to hear it through a different voice sometimes so you don't get kind of weary of hearing it and tune out. I want you to hear the words. I want you to hear what God is trying to say in the context of this passage. So Ephesians chapter 6, verses 10 through 17, words on the screen. You can look at a pew Bible there in front of you. You can look at YouVersion on your phone. I don't care how you get into the Bible. Just get into it so it gets into you. So here's Ephesians chapter 6, verses 10 through 17.
Finally, be strong in the Lord and in his mighty power. Put on the full armor of God, so that you can take your stand against the devil's schemes. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. Therefore, put on the full armor of God, so that when the day of evil comes, you may be able to stand your ground, and after you have done everything, to stand. Stand firm then, with the belt of truth buckled around your waist, with the breastplate of righteousness in place, and with your feet fitted with the readiness that comes from the gospel of peace. In addition to all this, take up the shield of faith, with which you can extinguish all the flaming arrows of the evil one. Take the helmet of salvation and the sword of the Spirit, which is the word of God.
Thank you. So 6:14 says, "Stand firm then," and this was last week, "with the belt of truth buckled around your waist." And then this week, "with the breastplate of righteousness in place." So breastplate of righteousness, the breastplate that he would have seen, the Apostle Paul that is, would have looked kind of similar to this. It would have been this kind of Roman-looking armor. Now, the metal armor would have been what the higher-ranked soldiers would have had. I mean, the average cannon fodder, shall I say, soldier would not have had metal. It would have been leather. Okay, but the higher-ranked soldiers would have had metal, a centurion, someone who was a commanding officer. And it doesn't take much genius and much thought to figure out why this piece of armor was so important. I mean, certainly in the case of the metal ones, it would show rank. But it also protected the most vital part of the body. You may say, "Joel, your head's more important." That's true. Get your head chopped off, you're not going to fight very long. But this part of your body is the biggest by square inches. All right? If a dagger or an arrow or a fist in some battle is going to land on you, it's probably landing right here. It's probably landing where there's the most surface area to hit. That's what their breastplate, and they would have called the whole thing. I mean, technically, it's not just the chest. It would have gone down into the abdomen, but it protected the heart, the lungs, the stomach, the liver, the intestines. It would have protected a bulk of the body. And they wouldn't have dared to have gone into battle without this. They could have skipped a lot of pieces, but they're not going to skip this one. And probably all by itself, the breastplate kept them alive more than anything else. Again, they could, get cut on the arm and they could keep fighting. You get stabbed in the heart, that pretty much ends the Roman conquest real fast. So they would have had this. So the issue then becomes, what did the Apostle Paul mean when he is now saying breastplate of righteousness? Because we even find a similar approach today with even police and military, that they still have body armor that protects primarily right here. Because again, that's the largest surface area. So why did the Apostle Paul put righteousness as this most critical, arguably one of the most critical pieces of armor? Why did he put that there? What is the breastplate of righteousness? Now here's the beauty of when the Apostle Paul writes. He is coming at this from so many angles, and he makes all these Old Testament references, and in the first century, they didn't have to do footnotes the way we have to do it in modern writing. When you're writing along and you quote somebody else's work, you got to put the little number in at the bottom. You put the footnote, or maybe you have an endnote or a parenthetical citation. Some of you are going, "Oh, I hate school." Look, it's just what you got to do to show it's not yours. They didn't have to do that in the first century. So we're just expected to know where this stuff comes from. And certainly the Apostle Paul's first century audience would have kind of had an idea where this had come from. But the Apostle Paul gets this idea, this imagery, most of the imagery of this armor comes from an Old Testament idea. It comes usually from the prophet Isaiah. And he writes a lot about this. In some ways, the Apostle Paul is quoting him directly. Isaiah 59:17 says this, "He," and that is the Lord. In this case, the "he" is referring to God himself. So he is God. God puts on righteousness as his breastplate and the helmet of salvation on his head. He put on the garments of vengeance and wrapped himself in zeal as in a cloak. So you have this idea that this breastplate of righteousness is something that is God's. Now you got to hang on to that one. That's really important to see here, that the breastplate of righteousness is first God's. It's not something that belongs to us. It's not something we are generating from inside of us. It is something that God gives us. Technically, all of the armor is from God. I'm not debating that point. But certainly the breastplate of righteousness is completely an act of God, because it is his righteousness that we wear. It is his goodness and right standing before God that we wear. So when the Apostle Paul is writing righteousness, he's writing a mouthful in a single word. I mean, he's certainly meaning that which puts us in right standing before God. He's certainly meaning that. He's certainly meaning those actions that God does through us that leads us to become more like him. But he's talking on a fundamental level about redemption. The Apostle Paul is talking on a very foundational level about our salvation. That moment we turn from darkness to light, from lost to found, from unredeemed and bound for hell to saved, redeemed, and bound for heaven. He's talking about our conversion. Or to put it in very theological terms, he's talking about our justification. Now, justification is a great $10 word, but you need this word. This is a great word. Let me tell you how cool this word is. Here's how amazing it is. Justification is a legal term. Okay, so we're talking God's courtroom legal term that you and I are so guilty, we are so absolutely rotten guilty that no matter what we do, we are still guilty. We can't do enough good deeds to balance out the ledger against us. We are guilty, we are sinners, we are filthy, we are rotten, and we are bound for hell. And if God is just, He must send us to hell. That makes a problem for God. Because if He wants to get us to heaven, He's got to deal with that problem that we can't be good enough. So, He sends Jesus, His Son, His one and only, who is perfectly, completely like Him. He sends Jesus, and then Jesus becomes our sin. He takes on our filth. He takes on our garbage. He takes on our hopelessness. He takes on our darkness. He takes on our stain. He carries it to the cross. He's crucified on our behalf. God's justice is poured out on Jesus so that we can become the righteousness of God. That's why you need justification. Because what happens in heaven then, when we cross from darkness to light and we say, okay, God, I'm giving you the keys to my kingdom. I'm committing my life to you. I'm not mine anymore. I'm yours. I am following you. When we make that step over that line, what happens in heaven is God looks at you, the Father looks at you, and He goes, your sin has made you filthy and dirty, and you deserve hell. But because you've accepted the gift of life through my Son Jesus, His blood has covered your sin. I declare you not guilty. You're not innocent because you're still sinful. You still got it in you. All that filth is still there. But the Father says, because of Jesus, I see you not guilty. Welcome to heaven. See, that's part of what he's talking about when he says breastplate of righteousness. You got to have it defines who we are. The Apostle Paul writes this in Romans chapter 3, verses 21 through 25. He says, 26, excuse me. He says, but now apart from the law, the righteousness of God has been made known, to which the law and the prophets, or in our terms, Old Testament, testify. This righteousness is given through faith in Jesus Christ to all who believe. There is no difference between Jew and Gentile, for all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God, and all are justified freely by His grace through the redemption that came by Christ Jesus. God presented Christ as a sacrifice of atonement through the shedding of His blood to be received by faith. He did this to demonstrate His righteousness, because in His forbearance He had left the sins committed beforehand unpunished. He did it to demonstrate His righteousness at the present time, so as to be just and the one who justifies those who have faith in Jesus. Now that's what I just was talking about. That's a process where God has handled the cosmological problem of the fact that we don't deserve heaven. We deserve hell. But He loves us so much, He wanted to give us heaven, so He sent His Son through hell to give us heaven. That's a summary of Romans chapter 3, 21 through 26. Joel's translation. But that's the process. That's part of this breastplate of righteousness that God has put on us. But I wonder how many of us Christians that profess Jesus as Savior forget that the breastplate isn't our own. I wonder how many of us act like we still are in the driver's seat of the car. My least favorite bumper sticker is, Jesus is my co-pilot. I'm going, then you clearly don't understand salvation. He's either the pilot or He is nothing. There is no in between. Either you have the breastplate and you realize it is all His and He has put that on you by His grace, or you're trying to do it yourself and earn it, in which case we already talked about that. There's nothing you can do to balance the ledger. You're already guilty before you ever started. You're never going to overcome that. See, it's Jesus plus nothing. It's His salvation plus nothing. There's nothing you can do to balance that equation out. It's all Him. But I wonder how many of us functionally live like atheists. We functionally live like we can figure it out all by ourselves. And so we wade off into battle, and we try to take that breastplate off, and we just kind of will our way through it. Doesn't work. You'll fail. You'll stumble. You'll fall, because that's not how it's designed to work. That's not how the armor fits. It fits because He has put it on us, and He calls us to wear it. Now that's part of what He means. Redemption, conversion, that process of moving from unsaved to saved, that act of our will where we commit our lives to Him and follow Him as His disciple. That's part of it. But there's also another part of this. See, Jesus loves us so much that He'll accept us just the way we are, and He'll just pour His sacrifice of atonement, His blood over us, so the Father sees us through Jesus' blood and sees us as His own. But there's also another half of this. He loves us enough to take us, but He also loves us so much He's not going to leave us just as messed up as He found us. See, that's the other part of that, where He's also talking about sanctification. Another great $10 word. And I don't throw around these words lightly. If you've heard me for more than 3 or 4 weeks, you know that I don't tend to use the big words. I tend to break it down, because I had a great mentor who always told me, you got to put the cookies on the bottom shelf so all God's kids can eat. But sometimes just one word just does it better. Here's what sanctification means. This is the lifelong process of God working you and me out of the equation. And He's working us out of us and putting more of Him inside of us. It's Him getting rid of the chaff that shouldn't be there to where it's Jesus being there. And it is a lifelong process, and it's not meant to be done by ourselves. This is the cool part. God calls you and me as individuals, and He pulls us into His family, but that's the kicker. He pulls us into His family. The idea of a Christian that is living apart from the church is either a liar or a hypocrite. The Bible doesn't have another category for that. We're told to not do that. If you're a Christian and you understand that your salvation is an act of God's grace that pulls you out of self-centeredness and out of loneliness and out of hopelessness, you will by definition understand He's pulling you into a community where you learn how to live out your life of giving to others. As Rick Warren so famously said in his book, Purpose Driven Life, your life is not about you. That's what the church teaches us. We learn to give ourselves away by serving and by giving and by getting involved with others. We learn that our life is not about us. But of course we are human and we're still sinful. Remember, we're declared not guilty. We're not declared innocent. So we still sin and we still stumble and we still pull away from the very thing we need. And the first century Christians were doing the same thing. We're not inventing new ways to sin just because we're 21st century people. We're still sinning the same way they did in the Bible. We can just get a lot more creative about it, and then we can stream it on YouTube when we do it. But we're still doing it the same way. So in the book of Hebrews chapter 10, verse 23 through 25, we have this caution. It says, let us hold unswervingly to the hope we profess, for He who promised is faithful. And here it is. And let us consider how we may spur one another on toward love and good deeds, not giving up meeting together as some are in a habit of doing, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day approaching. You know, the Bible assumes from the beginning that we are living in a community of faith, that we're living with the church. The reason that the Bible doesn't just come right out and just kind of say that clearly is because it didn't have to. It was written to a primarily Eastern culture that was very family-centric to begin with. But when these people began finding faith in Jesus, they began to, especially the Romans, these Gentiles, they weren't Jewish to begin with. They were more Western in their mindset, what we would call Western in their mindset. So as they began to find faith, they began to struggle with, well, how do I find family now? They're not my biological family. So the Scriptures are telling us that you have found a spiritual family. And you need to belong, and you need to encourage that spiritual family. Some of you may be familiar with this if you're into charcoal grilling. You may know what this is. This is called a chimney starter. These are just tongs. That's nothing special. So a chimney starter is because those of us who do charcoal grilling, we don't use lighter fluid to light our charcoal because we don't want our food tasting like gasoline. So we use this. We put the charcoal in it, fill it to the top, put some paper underneath it. You light the paper, walk away in like 15 minutes. It's ready to cook on. I mean, it's ashened over to the top. You pour it into the grill and you can cook. It's great. But another cool thing about this is the charcoal is never as hot as when it's in here and concentrated. Once you spread it out, it starts to lose heat. You could cook over this if you wanted to. By the way, it's a mean way to sear a steak. Right on top of it. All the heat's right there, and this little bit, like a jet engine. It's amazing. But a real cool thing, though, and I wanted to light it during the service, but it took so long, and it made all of our firefighters nervous, so we ixnayed that plan. But I have a piece of charcoal in here, and it's interesting. This charcoal, oh, I dropped it. Come back. This charcoal starts off cold, dirty, but cold. I can hold it in my hand. And Friday, when I was cooking something, I tried this experiment to see if it actually would work. I took a piece of charcoal, I set it off to the side on the sidewalk there on the back porch, and I left it alone. Would you believe that piece of charcoal turned black again? Just like when it started. It got cold again. It wasn't ready to cook on, but all the rest of the charcoal that was still in the chimney starter was hot. White hot. You could see red at the bottom, but this one little piece was cold. I could suddenly touch it again. But should I touch that, I would probably have a 3rd-degree burn. See, friends, we're the charcoal. That's why a Christian who says, "Oh, I don't need the church," is either a hypocrite or a liar, because this is what you become apart from the church. I didn't say that. The Bible said that. We need each other. We're designed for each other. We're designed to be white hot in the faith, and we're just not going to get there apart from each other. We're just not. We're not designed to do this by ourselves. We were never designed to do this by ourselves. You know, the Christian world this past week, I alluded to it in our prayer earlier. Maybe you've been watching on social media, maybe not, but a pastor with a first name named Jared this past week took his own life. And he struggled with depression for a while. He was very open, very public about it. And he took his own life, and Christians struggle with that, and they go, how could he get to that point? What happened? How does he flip that switch and become from white hot and just searingly hot and fine to all of a sudden, and I don't know that answer precisely, but somewhere in his heart and his head, he got isolated. Something happened that pulled him away, and he started believing the wrong voice. And I'm not in any way criticizing him, but for the grace of God go I. I am not in any way criticizing him. But let me tell you something. When we get off a little too much by ourselves in our thoughts, when we don't have the right people that can get into our lives in accountability, we will grow cold, and we will get perfect defense mechanisms to keep others out. And when that happens, when we get cold like that, you will find the unthinkable plausible. And you will do things you never imagined you would do. Never forget that sin breeds in darkness. Now, praise be to God, one act of sin does not undo what the cross has done. But we get isolated, things happen. See, folks, here's what we got to understand about this breastplate of righteousness. Here's how it protects us. Conversion is the starting point for our journey. It's the starting point for us. That's the point we go from darkness to light, but sanctification is the journey with the church. We are meant to stand together, or we will most certainly fall apart. We are designed for community. Conversion is just the starting point. Sanctification, that's the church's job. Now I want you to notice this wording very carefully. We wordsmithed this for a few days to make sure this was extremely clear. Conversion, when you go from darkness to light, when you go from lost to found, conversion is not a function of the church. We do not grant you salvation. We are not your Savior. You can't come up front and I now give you salvation. I didn't die for you. Jesus did that. Our job is not to give you salvation. Our job is to make sure that we provide a roadmap of sanctification, a process, a journey that you can take that will build your faith, that will give you resiliency, that will give you something to lean on when life falls apart. It's one part preventative, but it's also one part active, where we engage in that change where Jesus is reshaping us and molding us and making us into His image. That only happens with the church. That doesn't happen by ourselves. Because by ourselves, we're going to believe some really funny stuff. But with the church, it's a little different. Now people hold us accountable. Now we can't just go off and talk crazy. Okay? By ourselves, danger. With the family, sanctification, protection. Again, Jesus loves you so much, and he accepts you just the way you are, but he loves you too much to leave you broken and to leave you like he found you. Jesus is the ultimate fixer. He's going to fix it. He's going to make you better. He's going to build you up. That's what he does. That's also the mission of the church. That is what we are to do. Matthew 28, 18 through 20 reads as follows. Jesus came to them and said, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. And he says this, therefore go and make disciples. Not just converts. Not just people that cross the line. Disciples. That implies we have a responsibility to make sure you have a pathway that you can follow to find spiritual maturity. That is our job. Jesus said that. Make disciples of all nations, baptizing them. There's that baptized, part of discipleship. Them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. But Jesus hasn't done. He goes on, he says, and teaching them, that's those disciples we're making, to obey everything I've commanded you, and surely I am with you always. Jesus is saying this to the very end of the age. And you know who's there at the end of the age? Him. He's basically saying, I'm with you forever. You're not alone on this journey. You're not alone in this process. That conversion is the starting point. That's on you. You have to say, okay, I'm giving you that. But he brings you from loneliness into a family. That's why we say a lot around here. We're not trying to build a crowd. We're building a church, and there's a difference. One is just trying to attract you with sensationalism. The other is trying to make disciples. One is easy. One is a little harder. I'll sometimes say, somewhat discouragingly, I guess, that it takes the church a lifetime to make one mature disciple of Jesus. And by the time they're mature, Jesus takes them to heaven. Welcome to church life. See, we're designed to get this thing lifelong. Oh, so my friends, take the next step on your journey. Take the next step towards Jesus. Whatever that is for you, take that next step. For all of us today, we have a great chance to get in the game. We wear team colors. We root our team on, especially when they're winning, like mine started really playing hard at the second half. We root and we cheer for them, and we yell when the coach doesn't listen to us and still doesn't do what I'm telling him to do. And we get after them, but then we come here and we don't always root for our team. Today's a chance for you to get in the game. Get in a life group. Our life group fair is today right after the service. Hit that lobby. Talk to the different leaders. And if you find something in your bulletin, you're looking through that. If you like that and you don't know quite who that person is, you go up to the first person you see. I'll be at the guest center. Go to the first person you see and say, hey, where is so-and-so? That group sounds interesting. And I'm going to go right there. Second person down, right there. And I'll probably get their attention and connect you. Why? Because it's that important. Who cares that you don't know their name? You'll get to know their name. We want to put you in Christian relationships so you can take that next step in your journey, because sanctification is a journey with the church. But also we want to give you a chance to be a bringer. So we have these cards we're going to give you on the way out today, and if you need more, there's a bunch at the info center. And one side says there's hope here, and the other side just says sit with me. So we talk about investing and inviting in the lives of others. We talk about it a lot. Every few months we mention it. We do it different ways, but this is how we're doing it this time. This gives you a tool just to have a conversation with somebody. No, this little card is not going to bring them all the way to Jesus, but it's going to get them one more step. Because all you're going to do is you're going to say, sit with me. I'll tell you how much thought our team put into this. It's actually the kind of material, the kind of paper you can still write on. It's not glossy. So you could actually put sit with me and even put your phone number so they can text you. So you can say, yeah, hey, by the way, I'm coming to your house. I'm going to be there at such and such time. We try to think of it all, okay? We're going to give you these on the way out. We want you to be a bringer. I want you to start a spiritual conversation, because just as Chris was sharing earlier, your story is powerful. God gave that one to you. That's when He put that breastplate of righteousness on you. Don't be ashamed of that. But some of you today, you don't have that breastplate. Some of you today are counting on just simply being around a bunch of Christians as enough to get you to heaven. Or you're counting on somebody else's relationship. You got to understand this. God doesn't have grandchildren. You don't get in because your parents are getting in. He only has kids. So if you've not given Him your life, if you've not given Him your heart, you can do all the religious stuff in the world. You can invite 1,000 people, and I'll thank you for it, but there's that scale thing. You can't do enough to outbalance the sin in your heart. Because even the fact that you would invite 1,000 people is your way of trying to balance the scale, and Jesus already said you can't. That you're doing it for self-centered reasons. You're not really doing it for other people. In that case, you're doing it for yourself. See what I mean? We can't even do a good thing for a selfless reason without Jesus. If that's you today, here's your chance to take the solution. And that solution is simply a prayer away. It's you calling out to your Creator, recognizing what He did for you, and giving Him the one thing He wants from you, your heart. He says, come to me, all who are weary, burdened, tired, exhausted, broken. And He says, I'll give you rest. He's not adding to your burden. That's a lie of the enemy. He's taking He took the burden all the way to the cross. Your burden, my burden. Who are you? I am a grateful child of God. And all the rest of it doesn't really matter. Who are you? Would you all just bow your heads? Close your eyes, please. Nobody looking around. Our team's coming forward to prepare to lead us in song. But I just want to talk to those of you who you don't have that breastplate in place, that you know you're counting on something else getting you to heaven, but today is your day. And listen, if I'm talking to you, you're about to enter into an amazing journey. And if you're sitting here and you're listening to my voice, you're saying, Joel, that's not me. I got that covered. Fantastic. Pray for that person to your left or right, because you don't know if they do. I don't know if they do. God knows. You don't. Pray for that person. Pray for the people that are making this decision today, the most important decision you can ever make. Maybe you've been kicking the tires on this Jesus thing for 4 or 5 weeks or 4 or 5 months, but today's the day you're crossing over. And I'm just going to lead you in a prayer. You just voice this in your heart. You don't have to do it out loud. You can if you want. It's not about your lips. It's not about your actions. It's about you surrendering your heart, your life to Jesus. That's what it's about. All right? You can pray like this. You say, Jesus, I admit I am broken. I am sinful. I am lost without you. But the best I understand it, I believe that you died for me. You took my sin and you dealt with the problem. And that your blood is able to make me not guilty to your Father. And I want that. Jesus, I want that. Make me a new creation. I commit my life to you from this day on, all the way that you take me home to heaven. I am yours. I give myself to you. I give you the keys to my life, and I'm letting go. I trust you. I trust you. And I believe. And I commit my life to you. Thank you for saving me.